We were talking
Oh,
about it.
man.
Yeah. So it was crazy because when it first came out, I did a presentation with your twin before you shaved your beard by the hallway, and with Judge Derek, and they had both had it.
Okay.
But I hadn't had it, so I was like, I didn't know what to do, and they were saying, I was like, ooh, that sounds horrible. But when I got it, it wasn't bad. It was the aftermath.
Really, the long hauler.
Yeah.
So we have, hey everybody, good morning.
Morning.
I'm Camille, that's LeVar. Xavier's over there in the corner. You all know Lucky Jill, Matt, the most wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Mr. Benson. We are gonna go live in 5 minutes. 3 minutes. We want to treat this like the Oprah show. We want to make sure that everyone's phones are on silent. We want to make sure that there's nothing that comes through. We want everybody to kind of just be comfortable. I see everyone took their mask off. Great.
Do you know everything you're saying is showing up on Facebook Live?
Sure. Just want to make sure that, again, everyone's phone's on silent.
I want to make sure my phone is on silent, which
This
is
is going to be an hour sort of conversation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shakita LeGrant McLean. I am the Director of Milwaukee County's Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning, in the audience and online. I'm excited to have Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley and Dr. Kweku Smith here with us to kick off our new Community Health and Healing series. Over the next several months, community health and healing events will be held in neighborhoods across Milwaukee County, highlighting critical issues and connections to resources. The goal of today's conversation is to normalize discussions around mental wellness, to overcome the stigma that is connected to mental health, and to break down those barriers with services and resources. I would now like to introduce our distinguished speakers for this morning's event. We are joined by our very own Milwaukee County Executive, David Crowley. County Executive Crowley is a lifelong Milwaukee resident and has lived the pain and struggle that many in our communities face every day. He knows the joy of bringing people together to conquer those struggles. The fundamental tenet of Executive Crowley's administration is to build bridges to bring people together, not walls that keep them apart. We are also joined by Dr. Kweku Smith. Dr. Smith was born and raised in Milwaukee as a licensed psychologist in the state of Wisconsin. A clinical psychologist by trade, Dr. Smith has had the opportunity to develop his skill set in varying arenas throughout his career: correctional facilities, hospitals, and secondary and higher education. Since 2007, Dr. Smith has been the president of Blacksmith Psychological Consultative Services. He is a fierce advocate for social justice and community empowerment. Dr. Smith is regularly asked to provide commentary on issues of mental health. He strives to make an impact locally by providing training and support to area schools and agencies on topics of violence prevention, trauma-informed care, social justice, and human trafficking. Welcome, County Executive Crowley and Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Shakira.
Thank you.
That was so wonderful. I'm gonna throw you off guard because I told you what I was gonna ask you before to start off with. But in honor of Women's History Month, what I want you to do is this. I want you to think of 3 women. I want you to think of one woman who is now among the ancestors whose life has influenced you. I want you to think of one woman who you've never met but is still living, but her power somehow empowers you. And then lastly, I want you to end with a woman who you did know, who loved you, who poured into you, and helped make you the person who you are.
It's a great question. So when I first and foremost, I think about Val Phillips. Black woman, grew up in the city of Milwaukee and really paved the way, not only for women in this city and in this community, but for black people all across this state. Becoming an alderwoman, becoming a judge, becoming the first statewide African American to be elected as lieutenant governor. So when I think about women who paved the way for me to be here, there's no question I think about Val Phillips. When you think about a woman that I admire and never have met and would love to meet, the first one that comes to mind is Miss Michelle Obama. And I think about Miss Michelle Obama is because I'm a AmeriCorps alumni. I went through Public Allies, and I've seen her grow that organization in Chicago, but also the strong woman that she was, supporting the former President Barack Obama in that seat before becoming president, and even what she's doing after the presidency for this community. And then the last, a woman that I do know and who's poured into me so much is my mother, Valerie Crowley. Even when you think about the challenges, the struggles that she faced growing up, you know, and you think about many of the, you know, she battled with drug addiction and some mental health issues. I've seen her overcome a lot of that. And I've seen what she is doing today and how much she's poured into me, even to now, and how much she's pouring in her grandkids right now. And so, you know, I think about my mother and all of the adversity that she's been through. And so she would be the woman alive that's done so much for me.
And see, the reason why I wanted to start with that is because as we talk about mental health, oftentimes when we talk about mental health, people talk about mental illness, that kind of hard side, and that's why we don't want to talk about it. But when we talk about mental wellness, I always think about who's been the backbone of our society, of our community, that's held it down when it's been so difficult. When I think of a person that I've never met, but that's so powerful, I think of a lady you might know as Tina Turner, but we call her Anime Bullock. and the reason why I think about her is because if you ever got a chance to read her biography, you ever got a chance to hear her story, to see her movie, here's a young lady who was almost abandoned by her mother to live with her grandmother. Then to go into a city and to not be aware of what's going on and to find love with a man who helped her have her dream. But sometimes the dream on the outside is not the dream that everybody else realizes what's really going on internally. We see this lady deal with domestic violence, with sexual abuse, but even in the midst, still making hit records. And so when we talk about mental wellness today, I want to use her kind of as a theme because we want to talk about trauma and performance. We've all been traumatized in some way, from a historical context, from what's current going on, and even anticipatory view. But what I want to ask you is this: when we talk about mental health, mental wellness, it is such a stigma. Why was it important for you and your administration to say, you know what, we're going to break this curse, we're going to break the stigma, we're going to talk about it? Why was it important to you?
Well, first and foremost, if you don't know about me, I grew up on 23rd and Burleigh and 22nd and Brown. And when you think about growing up in some of the hardest hit, most impoverished neighborhoods, mental health issues are all around us. When you think about the drug abuse, when you think about alcoholism, when you think about some people who, just don't know what to do, or the homelessness that we may see. But what really hit home for me is that when, I've had a relative have his own crisis. And so, growing up, with my relative, there were times where you just thought that they were depressed, something was going on. And our family felt that there was something that we needed to do, but nobody knew what to do, right? And then when we started to figure out maybe this is an issue with mental health. When you want to get somebody help, particularly in the Black community, we were write it off as, oh, he's just having a nervous breakdown, or just having a mental breakdown, right? Not really understanding that something is going on psychologically in that person's mind. So when it came down to getting that individual some help, nobody wanted to touch it because nobody wants to, quote unquote, deem a person crazy, right? Because we don't know how to have the conversation about the spectrum of mental wellness. But it wasn't until that individual did something to hurt themselves to where they were in a position now to where they had no choice, because now they're on a Chapter 51 hold. And by that time, for us, we had no clue what was going on. And so they went to the hospital, behavioral health division, got some help. But when they came out, we didn't know what to do. We were stigmatizing that individual, just saying that, oh, they'll get over it, right? We just leave it alone. But also the fact that, we were doing things to where it was just like, we're just magnifying the stigmatization, or if that's a word, of what's going on right now. Because we would leave him alone. We would just leave them where they were and just do our thing, hoping that something would change. But throughout the course of the years, we realized that the problem was that he just needed some help. He just needed someone who was willing to have the conversation with him, willing to, dig deep into those issues that's been bothering him and festering within him, for so many years. And so for me, I think about that individual and I say to myself, well, how many more people are just like him? How many more Black men, brown men, Black women, brown women are in the same position as him? And it's not the fact that they don't think that there's an issue, they just don't know how to go about it. And they're afraid because of society's stigma on mental health in general.
Now, what I love about what you just said is you got real personal. And so oftentimes it's difficult for us to bring those kind of conversations out. And I think that's what allowed it to stay in the closet. Again, we're talking about the wellness, to be proactive, to be able to understand it. And you said we didn't understand what it was. We threw it away as a nervous breakdown. Why do you think that we had such a hard time to be able to say what it was?
Sometimes I think it's the fear of vulnerability that we have in our community. When we're talking about something that somebody's going through, just trauma in general, we're afraid to get so deep, and it's a very intimate conversation. And a lot of people, are afraid to step outside that box. I would say that one of the reasons why I would say we're also afraid is because we don't know what we have to do to step up. And when you don't have the tools or the resources to arm yourself to be able to go out and help an individual, you feel hopeless yourself. And so you don't want to enter into a conversation where you don't think that you can provide some solutions with an individual. And so I think a lot of the times we become afraid. But I would also say that we're afraid to talk about mental health because sometimes we don't want to talk about it because what we may be battling within ourselves. You know, because when we talk about mental wellness, right, it's a spectrum of mental wellness. You don't have to have a diagnosis. You know, people can be depressed without having a diagnosis. People can be angry and sad and be going through their own trauma without having a diagnosis. And so when you start to have those conversations, I think many people are afraid that they'll start to realize that maybe they need a little bit of help themselves, especially when you think about individuals who work within the field helping out these individuals and the toll it takes on them. And it's great because those are some of our unsung heroes right now in this community. But how do we make sure that we're helping out those individuals so they can be here for the long term and continue to contribute to society?
So everybody who's listening now is saying, okay, yeah, this sounds good. Like we've heard this before, we're saying the right things. But are we really going to get to the root of what causes a lot of these situations? A lot of the people in the audience are very educated. A lot of them are aware of the Adverse Childhood Experience study completed back in 1996. This was a study that showed about how a lot of mental illness really came about, and it was through these adverse childhood experiences, whether they happened in the home. And just recently, they started to talk about these community and these environmental issues. So what I want to do is I want to bring it back to a personal level, then to bring it, we're going to take it to a community level and then a more specific. We talk about all of the issues that we already have. I want you to talk about how this pandemic and COVID has exacerbated that situation and some of the things that you've tried to do to rectify that in real time.
Well, it's affected the social determinants of health. You know, when you think about housing, the eviction crisis that we were facing pre-pandemic and how it is exacerbated by this pandemic, the amount of isolation that so many individuals were going through. When you think about, you know, the opioid crisis and the overdose deaths that we've seen in this community, when you're stuck inside your home, you don't have the ability to interact with an individual, that can take a toll on you. When you think about the fact that many people lost their jobs, you know, they had nowhere else to go. They were collecting their unemployment checks, still trying to figure out, once this runs out, how am I going to put food on the table? How am I going to continue to pay rent? How can I get to and from work or to the job interview or to school so I can get the skills needed to get a better job? This pandemic has exacerbated everything when you look at the data. The data is showing us exactly what is happening in real time. And so, you know, with the CARES dollars and with the ARPA dollars that we're going to be allocating, you know, one, we knew right away we had to do something around eviction. And you know, for me personally, you know, growing up in the city of Milwaukee, I've been evicted off of 22nd and Brown, we've been evicted off of 24th and Lloyd, and we've been evicted off of 29th and Walnut. And so when you take a child or a family itself and uproot them and say that you can no longer live here anymore, that takes a toll on you. That's trauma. And so we have been trying to do everything that we can to invest these dollars upstream so people don't have to go to the trauma in the first place. And it's not the easiest thing to do, and not everybody's going to be on board, but when you invest upstream, you save a lot more money downstream, and we're actually creating a society that everybody can believe in.
Well, let me ask you that, because I think you hit a great point. You said we want to invest upstream. And people say, if you ever want to know where a person's heart is, where a mind is, look at where their wallet is at. Yeah. So we start talking about all of the other places that we can invest upstream. There was a term that a lot of people didn't like defund the police. And I don't think they meant defund the police. I think they meant, how do we reallocate dollars so the police can have some extra help? So when we think about those things there, tell me, how can we reallocate funds to our school systems? How can we reallocate funds towards our reentry systems? How can we reallocate our funds towards the income inequality that we see within our county here? I know those are a lot of questions, but I want you to try to wrap that up in how we can do it, because when people see the budget, they want to complain. Talk about how your budget really is investing in mental wellness.
Well, I mean, our budget is a moral document. You know, I mean, for us, you know, we don't want our budget driving our strategy. We want our strategy driving our budget. And when you think about politics in general, I mean, that takes a mental toll on everybody, right? And this is one of the reasons why some people participate and some people don't, you know, because they have been traumatized by the system itself. But when you think about this particular system, it benefits us all as well when you think about how much money goes into the roads, how much money goes into public health, how much money goes into the prison industrial complex, or how much money we need to take out of the prison industrial complex, or when we're talking about just funding programs and services in general. But we have to get people out to vote. We have to get people who understand what government does. What does the city does? What does the county do? What does the state and the federal government do? And so for me, you know, we have to find ways to engage this community in understanding how they're connected to government and why they need to be involved. But I would say that when we try to make that connection as elected officials, one of my favorite quotes is, "No one cares what you know until they know how much you care." And we have to go out there and really show individuals how they're actually connected to this. Because when you think about the city of Milwaukee, people will say, well, they don't deserve any funding until they don't have their garbage being picked up. And then they realize that's a sanitation issue and that's a public health crisis, right? Or when you realize that, oh, we need to fill up all these potholes. You know, otherwise we're going to be spending $600 to $1,000 just to fix, our tires every time we run over all of these potholes. Or when you talk about the fact that we need to invest in redesigning our streets so people can bike and drive and walk safely to wherever they're going, like a park or to the doctor's office or even to school. And so when we talk about what do we need to do, we have to engage. We have to engage. And really what it is that so many people have been left to the wayside. They haven't got the resources that they need to meet the needs of what's going on in their household or on their block, right? But I would also say it's going to take relationship. The past 2 years, we've been on screens, and to be able to do this right now is phenomenal. But I would say that it's going to take relationships. We all have to step outside our comfort zone and build relationships with individuals to create that society that we wanted to see here. When I ran for this seat, it was about bringing people to the table, and we want to continue to bring people to the table. This is not about somebody replacing you at the table, because if you feel that there's not enough seats, then we need a bigger table. Come on. So we got a lot of things to do with bringing more people to the table, especially those who live in some of the most marginalized communities, the communities I grew up in, and making sure that they have a direct voice and being a part of the solutions. But that's how we're going to get there.
So I love what you said, you want to build a bigger table. But when you have that bigger table, and this is where all of you come in here right here, the people at that bigger table are so busy helping. The question is, who helps the helpers? And so what I want you to do is I want you to dig deep inside of yourself. And you think about from your political career, after you had kind of achieved some of that kind of American dream. Talk about a time in your life where it was low for you, where it was real for you, where you was like, not only do I see that the community needs this, but I need this, and these are some of the things that I've done to be able to help myself.
That's a really good question. I could talk about, when I first, won this seat in a sense. 35 years old, I'm a black man and I'm a county executive. And when you think about that, imposter syndrome comes real quick. Yeah. It comes real quick, and you sit there and you start thinking to yourself, do I belong here? And that was the question that I asked myself the first few months of being in this seat is, do I belong here? And it wasn't a question of whether I believe I would belong here, but I had to realize that I've been conditioned to think that way. Yeah. The trauma that I've been through in my own upbringing, my experience, it says that a black man should not be the executive because we never seen that in the city of Milwaukee or in Milwaukee County or in this state of Wisconsin. And so in order to help myself out, one, I had to focus on, okay, I'm a man of God, so I need to pray a little bit more, right? I need to meditate and take a step back. But one, I need to go talk to those who poured into me for me to be in this seat. Let me go talk to some of my mentors and ask them questions and literally bounce the fact that, like, okay, I'm struggling right now. Yeah. Is this normal? And when you start to have those conversations, not only with your mentors, but my peers in other communities, I realized that I wasn't any different than anybody else who would have become a county executive or a mayor or a governor. But the thing was that I had to realize that, you know what, I'm not the only one with these feelings. I'm not the only one who has, the issue of sometimes self-doubt. And I think we all have that, but the question is, okay, how are our relationships? How strong are the relationships that I have in my family, in my community, in this society, to where I can have these vulnerable conversations with individuals who are literally going to feed my soul and pick me up because they understand that, you're not different. But then I realized, this is the same conversation that we're having just related to mental health in general.
I just want everybody to give him an applause right here for 1 second. Because what you just did is you've encapsulated everything about mental mental wellness, mental health, mental illness, it's that secrecy. I don't want anybody else to know that I'm dealing with this. And we all are dealing with it. It's like, when you're in class, nobody wants to raise their hand, then the one person brave enough to raise their hand, and then everybody can come out. And see, that's what has to happen here. And what I love about that level of vulnerability from the top part, we all applaud it because we love you. And we love you, you know why? Because you took that step. It's sometimes, I've listened to speeches of Martin Luther King, and I remember April 3rd, 1968. He said, I'm tired. And I'm thinking, like, King, we revered his leaders for his strength, but it was in his vulnerability that he said, I'm sick of fighting for stuff that should have been mine for when I was born. And when I see your youth, I think that's really the greatest, because when anything great happens inside of our society, it's done by the younger generation. So now with that being stated, you saying, hey, I recognize I'm not an imposter, but I had to fight against that. What was built in you, though? Because see, now this comes to the real point. It was something in you, something instilled in you, that when those voices of doubt came, that you said, no, I'm gonna overcome this with these voices of empowerment. You talked about being a man of faith. Tell me how that faith has inspired you, has strengthened you through this walk and through this journey.
Well, my faith guides me, all the time, with decisions that we make, because I'm not thinking about just myself. I'm thinking about the broader community. I'm thinking about, being that servant leader that I am blessed to be for this community. And so I would say that, when I think about just my faith in general, and shout out to folks like Bishop Harvey, who instilled a foundation to me later on in life, because I was afraid of church in the very beginning. But I would say that, who also helped instill that resilience in me was Reggie and Charlene Moore. When I was 17 years old and going through so many issues, there were times where, I literally would spend all of my evenings and nights at Urban Underground. Or if I couldn't go home and I had nowhere else to go, no, I slept on their couch. And there were times, and I always think about, something Reggie said to me when I was 18 years old, and I started to become a leader within the organization. And he said, David, you got a lot of great ideas. And you started a lot of good things. You never followed through. What's up with that? And that's always stuck in the back of my head ever since, to follow through. And so when you have individuals like Reggie and Charlene and other organizations and other elected officials who meet you as a 17, 18-year-old, and you're trying to do all this community organizing, and they're telling you more about your own potential that you've never seen in yourself, something starts to click. Something says, okay, they telling me something, everybody's telling me something. At some point, I'm gonna have to start to either believe it or just remove myself out of the situation. But if I'm going to remove myself out of the situation, then I'm removing myself from opportunities, from different challenges to make me a better person. So I started to embrace all the things that many of my mentors were telling me and started to actually believe in it and embody it. Now, I would say that in the very beginning, it was a struggle, because it's like, okay, am I overly confident? I definitely don't want to be cocky, but at the same time, I do want folks to know, I do know what I know. And know that, like, I'm going to go do what needs to be done, because we know what this community needs and what's right. And this is what the community is asking for. And so my faith in all my mentors instilled that resilience in me. And when you read many different stories in the Bible about what people went through. I mean, when you think about King David, and nobody thought that he was going to be king, and he ended up doing so many great things. And it's not to say that he didn't fail.
I'll catch that King David. I caught that, didn't you?
And it's not to say that he didn't fail, but he was always after God's heart. And for me, I'm not only after God's heart, but I'm after the heart of the people.
No, I love that, because you talk about David and the giants, and they say true giants can live in the air and keep their feet on the ground. Now, what I love about what you said is we all go through this. But when we look at the statistics, and why I didn't want to start this, because the WHO, the World Health Organization, the CDC, they'll tell you that 1 in 5 deal with a depression, 1 in 5 deal with some type of mental illness, 1 in 4 deals with this, 9% goes through major depression, 21% goes through anxiety, and they give these numbers. And I always thought it was falsely misleading, because I said everybody goes through this at some period of time. Now, the question is whether it's chronic. But the thing is, what do we do up front? And what I loved about what you said is, I had people who instilled in me. You talked about several people. In the ACE study, they say if all of these things go wrong, you're going to have a bad life. But they said that can't be, because it's been through so many people who's gone through trauma and still had the ability to perform. And those who had the ability to perform, they had a resiliency about them. But that resiliency came through people who loved them, who poured in them, who believed them, as you talked about Bishop Harvey, Reggie, and Charlene Moore. How can we get our community to pour into all of these young people who sometimes don't have the Reggie and Charlens and the Bishop Harveys in their life?
Well, one, we got to stop being afraid of our young people. You know, right now, people are afraid to even, you know, set a bar for them at times. They don't even have any expectations for some of our young people. And I think that right now, we really need to find ways to get them under our wing. And I think sometimes what ends up happening, especially with young people, they're like, well, I don't have any mentors, right? I don't have any mentors. And it's like, well, what makes you think that? Because you felt like you haven't went out there and found your mentor? Or you just feel like you don't have anybody to talk to? Because sometimes you got mentors in your life all the time. You just don't make that connection. You just don't make that phone call. And sometimes you don't do that just because out of fear. But as a 35-year-old, those who are older, but even those who are particularly younger, right? Those between the ages of like 18 and 24 who are doing great things, some of them don't understand the power that they have in making connections to our high school and middle school youth. And so when I was doing youth development and youth organizing, I realized at a young age that I have the ability to actually change the course of these young people. And it's based off of my relationship. I mean, we got Jeremy sitting behind you right now, and he was a part of Urban Underground. He was one of my mentees. And seeing all the things that he's been able to do, you know, because of all the great things all the great people that he's been around, right? I like to say that, you know, I'm the reason why, but I know that's not the reason.
So part of it.
But I'm proud of the things that he's done, just like those individuals who poured into me are proud of the things that I've done. But we have to realize that, you know, when we talk about young people, this is really about relationships. Yeah. You know, this is really about connecting with them and really having those down-to-earth conversations with them, because, you know, I went through a lot of trauma. I went through a lot of issues. Some of these young people are going through things that I've never thought about before. You know, when you think about the amount of drugs that are hitting the streets, the amount of guns that are hitting the streets.
Social media.
You know, social media, right? I didn't have Facebook growing up. You know, I remember flip phones, and you couldn't take a picture and send it to somebody unless you had money to do that. Yeah. But now it's a different society right now. And so we have to realize this, with our young people, is based off of relationships. And the people who influence them the most are their peers, right? Because they're closer in age. And then the next outer circle is, okay, who's on their block? What is their family like? What are their friends like? What are their classmates like? What are their teachers like? And it just broadens out. But we have to be intentional about the relationship. Yeah. And I would say this, the relationship isn't just about being a friend, but it's a level of accountability. It's a level of having expectations and responsibility to one another. Because when young people see that and they feel that we have a relationship with who you are, with you, I don't want to disappoint you. Yeah. I want to do things for you. And so when I see the investment, at the end of the day, I want you to be proud of me. Yeah. And it's not to say I'm not going to make mistakes along the way, but our young people need that type of love and need those types of relationships in this community.
You keep saying one word that sticks with me, and that's relationships, this connectivity. And I think that's absolutely essential, because love is always the answer, and love is through those relationships. There's a concept known as psychological safety. It's coined in the business world about how do we make our company better. And there's 4 points that's attached to the work of Tim Clark, Amy Edmondson out of Harvard. And they said the first one is that people need to feel included. And so you talk about relationships. What do we say to the people who say, you know what, I don't feel welcome in this society? We look at the horrific statistics about the social determinants of Milwaukee being one of the worst places to live for African Americans. We look at some of the high rates of poverty, the high rates of incarceration. We see the divisiveness within our own city. The first step to making people feel psychologically safe so they can have relationships is to feel included. What is your department trying to do to bring that inclusion to us all?
Well, I mean, that's one of the strategic plan objectives is inclusion. We want to be intentional on who we include to be at the table. You know, so when you think about, Milwaukee County, generations of what we invested in, the people who've seen the most divestment have never been included in the conversations. Yeah. And it's been going on for generations, not just with Milwaukee County, but all levels of government, right? But you can even say when we talk about businesses and how they invest in our communities as well. I mean, I don't see too many banks in the inner city of Milwaukee, right? Because that's not a part of their business model.
See,
I want to make sure I'm answering.
No. You're absolutely saying it because we talk about this inclusion with psychological safety. Because the first step is if I'm going to be involved in something, if I'm going to vote, if I'm going to trust this relationship, I have to feel like I'm welcome. And I think these forums such as this is saying we're trying to bring people in.
Yeah.
The second aspect of this psychological safety is what we call like it's a learning attribution, where people feel like I can ask questions, I can come in without being criticized. So the person who was not at the table, that is at the table, not afraid to raise their hand, they can fail and still not be disappointed, not be ostracized, things in that nature. How are you encouraging, because this is the biggest thing for our community, sometimes I think we unfairly criticize our political figures. And I'm hard on political figures, you know that. But I also say this, but if the people aren't helping, what can they do? So what challenges do you have to the people? Because you say, okay, I'm trying to include you. I want you to be here. I want you to reach out to everybody that's in here. What are some of the questions that they can bring? What are some of the things that they can do that you say, hey, I want you to feel like you're welcome inside of this? What are some of the aspects that we have that can open those up as far as town halls, any type of situation where people come in and bring those great ideas?
Well, they can always bring those great ideas to Milwaukee County. You know, we are about partnerships. We don't believe that Milwaukee County should be the sole entity doing any of this work, you know. And honestly, I would say that we shouldn't be leading in this work because there are organizations that are on the ground doing this work already. And I would say that when government starts to lead, that's when you start to lose people sometimes down the road because people don't trust government. And so the more partnerships that we create, one, the bigger the table becomes, but the people who are part of, who are experiencing the issues, see the problem, are now at the table providing those solutions. And so that's critical. That is extremely critical. But I would say that I have an open door policy as well. You know, my goal is to be one of the most accessible county executives that we've ever had.
So for someone who's listening to you right now, and they say, you know what, we've heard this before from other people. We've had this rug pulled from under us. We've had this football move before. What are some things, some tangible things that you've already done? So you can say, listen, these are some examples so you can at least give this administration a chance.
Oh man, I mean, we've done a lot of stuff. I mean, when you think about even with the Office of Equity, right? And when we were making that change, particularly from the Office of African American Affairs to the Office of Equity, there was a lot of pushback. And we definitely understood why, because some people felt that, okay, everybody always take the black thing and then they want to turn it into something else. But what people didn't understand is that this is going to help us bring in more dollars to actually feed our strategy and the goals that we're looking to meet all the time. So when you think about the Office of Equity, right, now we can bring in those dollars from all walks of life, because it's hard to find dollars just for black people, right? It's a reality. And so when you think about people with disabilities, we think about the LGBTQ community, when you think about people who are aging, one, black people are all intersect with all of those different abilities or identities. And so when we did that change, we brought people to the table to talk about why we were doing it and wanted to hear their concerns. But once we made the change, people also understood what we were trying to do. Because now what we're doing is we're layering this on top of all of county government. It's just not just going to be the department and what they do, but how they're connected to DHHS, how they're connected to parks, how they're connected to the strategy and budget office and performance office. We are doing some of these things, and I would say that it takes a lot of tough conversations. You know, we have a lot of tough conversations. I mean, even internally, you know, we sometimes battle with one another, which is a good thing because you want to have that to make sure you're creating a program, a service, or a product that everybody can enjoy. But, you know, what I will say is that in order to have more of that, the community has to also make sure that they see some of our blind spots. We aren't necessarily the smartest people in the room. Nor will we be the smartest people in the room.
So what challenge do you have for them? Because you say the bigger government is, sometimes it's more the problem. What specific challenge do you have for the citizenry to say, hey, listen, if you don't see this being done, go do this on yourself? You kind of gave an example with the Reggie and the Charlotte where they create an urban underground. They allow you to come in and do some things that they get no credit for, but they do out the goodness of the heart. What are some challenges that you say you want to put out to the people?
Well, the first challenge is come work for Milwaukee County. When you think about the work that we're doing, we're looking to hire change makers. You know, whether we're talking about our bus operators who are getting people to and from work, to the hospitals, to the education centers. When you think about the folks that we need to work within our criminal justice system, right? When you think about just getting rid of the backlog and making sure that we're taking care of individuals who are currently housed within the House of Corrections or within the jail, right? So that would be the first challenge, is that if you want to contribute to this community, come apply for a position here within Milwaukee County. But the other thing is try to be involved. We have many different boards, commissions that are available, from the parks to Health and Human Services, to our Commission on Aging, to our ARDC. There's things for people to be a part of. And I think a lot of the times people just look at what's happening at the county board level and what's happening at the county exec's office, but may not know what's happening at the Commission of Aging, or what's happening with the ADRC or our Ethics Commission. There's so much to be paying attention to. And I get it. People got busy lives. But when we're talking about government that touches your lives, whether you like it or not, we're contributing to your society in some fashion. So for me, the challenge is, one, come look at how you can be a part of not only what Milwaukee County is doing. When you think about the philanthropic organizations, when you look at our public school systems, when you look at many of the nonprofits that are on the ground right now doing the day-to-day work to work with young people or to work with our aging population, go out there and volunteer. And so, I always talk about the 3 T's, your time, treasure, or talent, right? You can either give your time by volunteering, giving to this community. You can give your treasure. That's when you make a donation to some of these organizations to make sure that they continue to do the great work. Or utilizing your talent, right? Whether you sing, dance, or you're a mental health professional, utilizing your talent to bring awareness or to bring people into the organization. That's what we need, and we need that from everybody. Because not every role is for everybody, but there's a role for somebody, and we all have a role to play when it comes down to the progression of this community.
Love that. So now I'm gonna put you on the spot again, because you didn't know I was about to do this. Third stage of psychological safety is when people actually start to contribute. So you said I put the challenge out, people have met it. It's a lot of wonderful people back here. I want you to point out 2 people who's done something great, and to be able to tell the community not only what they've done great, in a whole sense of mental wellness. It doesn't have to be mental health, because I think one of the things we've established is life creates mental health. So if we create any avenue that's good anywhere, we've contributed to mental health. But I want you to look, and I want you to think about 2 people. Now, you can only pick 2. So
I'm like, oh, man.
I'm gonna put them on the spot.
Oh,
so I told him we
man.
can only pick 2. But the reason why I want to do that is because 2 reasons what psychological safety is. It feels good to be rewarded, specifically publicly, but then 2, it also shows other people like, wow, he's looking at this. I didn't even know he thought that. He's never told me that, but this was in my head. But then it gives other people the ability to say, hey, let me go ahead and do this because I see my other colleagues doing something. Now I feel more empowered.
Man, so he told me, put me on the spot.
I
So
sure
I really don't like that. So I gotta, so pick 2 people. So I'm gonna pick one organization. So one, I think about DHHS, right? So DHHS.
You see how smart he is? Boy, he's flexible.
So when you think about DHHS, right? I mean, you have our Commission on Aging, when you talk about housing, when you talk about veteran affairs, when you talk about disability programs, when you talk about DYFS, when you talk about BHD, like this encompasses all our health and human services. And when you think about everyone, from the top down, who's contributing to this particular department, they're giving their blood, sweat, and tears in some cases. When you think about, the workers at BHD and what they're going through and what they're seeing on an everyday basis, or when you think about our housing division, when they're going out, doing the outreach on the streets every morning, and I've been out there with them between 2:30 and 6:30 in the morning, trying to find ways to get people connected to housing and doing the point in time count, right? So I think about DHHS, right? But also think about like WCS. Right, when you think about what they're doing to help us get individuals out the system, stop housing them inside of our House of Corrections or within our jail system, and put them on a path to where they can better themselves and their families, right? Keeping someone locked up, whether we're talking about in the jail or if it's talking about mental health, that does no one any justice. We need people in the community with the folks that's willing to support them to help them along this journey so they can be reintegrated and contribute to society.
So what I love about that is you gave a safe answer. You gave a safe answer. But with everybody doing great things, and it was an excellent answer, and I thank you all for what you do on a daily basis. What hurts people so many times is when people work as hard as they do, but they feel like they're on a hamster wheel. Like as hard as I'm running, I see things staying the same or maybe even getting worse. The last part of psychological safety is the ability to challenge the status quo. And oftentimes when people challenge, and I'm talking about significant challenge that could change the status quo, they're met with resistance. Well, we can't do it because of the red tape. We can't do it because of bureaucracy. You can't change a ship's course overnight. You get all of those things, and so you get a frustration, you get turnover, and so you don't get the type of consistency that you would want. You lose a lot of talent. When there is challenges that come your way that you say, we can't do that, how do you turn that no into a yes or trying to find a way?
Well, I never start with no. I always ask, and I always ask my team, okay, how do we get to a yes? If we can get to a yes. And I have to say that, even with the leadership of Chairwoman Marcelia Nicholson, Milwaukee County has already started to challenge the status quo. They started to even challenge themselves. 2019 declared racism as a public health crisis. May 2020, I'm sworn in, we changed the mission and vision of Milwaukee County that, by achieving racial equity, we can become the healthiest county in the state of Wisconsin. That is a challenge to the system. And it's not only our system here locally, but when you think about the racial turmoil that we're seeing not only in this state, but across this country, we're challenging everyone to think differently about how we look at race and how we look at equity and health equity in general. And so for us, the challenge sometimes is, okay, what other challenge do we have? Identifying even more challenges. And this is where the community actually can step up in and is helping us how we can get better. But we are always challenging ourselves. We're always looking at how can we be different? How can we, with us being the first jurisdiction to say racism is a public health crisis, you've had 180 communities follow suit. Everybody's looking at us while we build this plane and fly it, and they're doing the exact same thing. So how do we start to create the metrics and everything to lay out, here are some of the best practices. Here's what we were successful at. Here's where we failed at, and working with individuals. So the challenge is always out there. And we're always going to continue to challenge ourselves. But in order to challenge yourselves, right, you got to have resources. And that's one of the things that we're fighting for, is fighting for more resources so we can make the required investments to make sure that everything that we're challenging is actually successful.
Okay. So I want you to take a deep breath, because here comes the hard question.
All right.
Because
all the other ones was easy.
Because this is the one that gets to the point where we talk about the hamster wheel. There's theories of social reproduction that says the system is designed to reproduce itself. People say the system is not broken, it's doing exactly what it's designed to do. Working within the confines that you have, how do we change that system? How do we cause so much havoc that we change the system as it is? And I'll give you an example to give you time to think and process this. 53206, a zip code I grew up in. I absolutely hate the narrative around it, because when I grew up in it, it was full of love. It was full of respect. It was full of hardworking people. I went to Green Bay Avenue on 7th and Melvina. My dad worked at A.O. Smith. I remember me and my mom and sister going to pick him up, seeing all these thrones of men coming out with their hard cases and that protector provider image. As the 70s increased, I saw that. Then the 80s, you saw it go down, go down, go down. And as you saw A.O. Smith and other subsidiary companies and things go down, we saw the increase in drugs and gangs. We saw the increase of the prison industrial complex. We saw a different city. In the 70s, Milwaukee was one of the greatest places for people to live. But now we look here in the 2000s, 2010s, as we go to the 2020s now, perennially one of the worst places. What can we do honestly to be able to make a change with that? Because we can use flowery words, we can make small changes for people, but how do we make substantial changes for the masses on a long-term basis?
It's a really good question. This probably is the hard question that you could have asked me. When I ran for this seat, I always talked about how can we remove Milwaukee on being on the list of one of the most segregated places, right? And it's like, okay, I just can't get a bunch of black folks to say, okay, go move here. A bunch of white folks come move here, right? But it's also, I would say, it's about how do we get people to move around this community in general. Just like you talked about growing up on 23rd and Bird Life 53206, growing up in that neighborhood the first 10 years, I never really left the block. I never left the block. I knew Moody Pool, I knew Carter Drug Store, and I knew Our Avenue. You know, and that's all I knew. And sometimes my parents didn't want me to go to the park because of the violence that was happening inside the park. You know, but when we talk about how do we make the change, one, this is when we talk about racial equity. You know, youngest and the first African American to be in the seat as an executive. But then when you start to look at, okay, that's great. But you look at businesses, you know, some of the businesses that we have downtown and across this community, you start to ask yourself, okay, how many people of color do we have in just managerial and executive positions, senior positions? And you don't see them. And so you have to work with businesses, one, and say, okay, what are you doing to change your own culture, right? And a lot of the times, like, oh, we're bringing in people, you know, but it's just like, but you're not bringing in nobody from this community. You know, a lot of times we like to do transplants. It's not to say that we can't transplant people here and they can't contribute, but what are we doing to uplift the folks who have lived here their whole lives and giving them some type of opportunity so we can literally end the cycle of poverty? We have to be intentional on that, and our businesses and our philanthropic community, as well as government, has to be intentional on doing that. But I would say it's also making sure that you got to get people outside their comfort zone, right? So, you know, I remember, like, I grew up on the north side my whole life, and we moved, you know, almost every year of my life from the age of 14 to about 24. I moved every year. And I remember when I first stepped out my comfort zone, because we moved to the south side. And we moved on inside the Golden Domes on 5th and Lapham, and it was the first time where I lived in a community where the majority of the people didn't look like me. You know, because I didn't go to school with too many people who identified as Latino. I didn't go to school with too many people who identified as white. You know, so for me, you have to get people to step outside their comfort zone, right? Because when you think about particularly businesses in the inner city, they can't get the amount of customers through because of the perception of the inner city. You know, so people will go downtown. People go on the outskirts of the city of Milwaukee or Milwaukee County because they just don't trust it. But some of this change is related to changing the perception of this community. Some people say, yeah, and I agree, this is the worst place to raise a black child when you think about the state of Wisconsin. But when you think about the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, we're also a jewel. We also have hidden gems here. When you think about the amount of park space that we have, the amount of programming that we have, the amount of services that we provide as a county. Many other communities outside, particularly in this state, outside of Milwaukee County, if you needed some things, you won't get those resources outside of Milwaukee County. So so for us, it's really about relationships. It's about relationships and being intentional on moving the needle. And I think a lot of the times people say, well, I went out there and I tried, right? I tried. You know, one of my favorite quotes is by Yoda, don't try, do, right? And when you say you tried, that means you failing with honor, you know? And when you try, that means when you fail, you're okay with it, you know? But when you fall, you don't try to get back up. You get back up, you know? And so we need people to go out there and do the work and not try to do the work. You're doing the work. Whether you fail or not, you're doing the work. The question is, are you learning from that failure? Are you tweaking and looking to push out even a more successful program or service? And I think that once we become more intentional on how we are integrating business, government, our school systems, all of the different industries within Milwaukee County to focus on the upward mobility of those who have been in the cycle of generational poverty, that's when we'll start to move the needle even more.
See, I love that you said that, because that segues us into the next part so beautifully. When people say, you know what, we need more mental health services. If you have the greatest of therapists, through all of the meta-analysis and the studies that was done back in 2014, they said if you have a great therapist, it can account to up to 14% of the change in a person's life. So you think about that. I meet with a person once a week, twice a week. 14% of my life can become better. But it's 86% now of that pie that's left. So most of the times when people think about mental health, they think about, I'll go in and talk with somebody, it'll be fixed, it'll be clean. It's not that easy. There's so many other issues that go with that. You talked about the wealth gap and things of that nature. Wall Street Journal said in 2016 it would take 228 years to close the racial gap between black and white. We're not waiting 228 years. So I'm asking you these things that's going to lead into the part. When you speak progressively and you speak powerfully, that has to have a weight on you, because the goal of every politician is to be reelected. But sometimes if you are too radical, you are too outside the norm,
Yeah.
they're afraid that they won't be reelected, and it compromises them. How do you guard against that with your mental health and your integrity?
You know, I try not to make decisions based off reelection. You know, people want someone who's going to be a leader and actually do the things that needs to be done. And the thing is that whether we can do it or not, we are very open and transparent within this administration as far as what we can and cannot do. And so, ask your question one more time. I want to make sure.
No, I just wanted to know, how do you maintain your mental wellness while being so proactive, while being proactive, knowing that some of the things you say could potentially hinder?
Well, right now, the only thing that lifts me, like I can't say the only thing, but what lifts me up the most is when I go home and I see my two youngest daughters, right? And I got three. Alyssa's 14, Ava is 4, and Autumn is 2. And when I walk through the doors every evening, my 4 and 2-year-old literally runs into the door and it's just like, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy!" Like that's what keeps my fire burning, because the work that I'm doing, you know, I don't necessarily know if I'm gonna see it in my lifetime, right? When you think about the fight that we have been in, you know, I remember being out during marches and people will say, "Well, how long have you been marching?" Hell, we've been marching since before I was here.
Yeah.
You know, so for me, you know, it is my girls. When I look at them as you know, 2 African American young women that I am raising, you know, I want them to have not only the same but even greater opportunities that I have. You know, but also when I think about, you know, growing up in 53206, I still go see, you know, like a godmother to me off of 10th and Burleigh. And when I'm in the hood, they don't treat me any differently because they don't look at me any differently. But I'm still able to have those conversations. That lights the fire under my belly, because I will never forget where I come from. And so for me, you know, that's really what it is. And meditation and prayer. You know, it's not easy. You know, I would tell anybody it's definitely not easy. But I would also say what also helps is that I got a great team. Yeah. You know, when I think about, you know, all of our department heads, you know, my chief of staff, you know, our deputy chief of staff, everybody who's been with me, even before I was elected in this particular seat, you know, they make sure to check in on me. They definitely make sure to check in on me. And I truly appreciate them, because they know it's not easy for me, and I know it's not easy for them. And so we've developed that type of relationship where it's just like, okay, let's make sure that we're checking in general. But I would tell you that anyone, whether you're elected or running your own business, having a great team is what helps relieve that burden of having to do great all the time, right? And I would say that that's something I had to get over. You know, it's almost feeling like you can't mess up, like you always got to be on. But then I realized that, like, you know, I'm human. It's okay. It is okay.
No, I love what you said, because that goes into our assignment where everybody has a folder. I want you to open up your gray folder while I start to talk about him, because we're talking about what makes people mentally healthy. And so we've talked about relationships. We talked about this financial gap. But what was amazing to me, and I know you're a big fan of our world champion, Milwaukee
you know I'm a
Bucks,
fan of the Bucks.
2021.
I was there last night.
And so when you look, even in the NBA, you look in the NFL, you look at Major League Sports, you hear these athletes with millions of dollars, with financial security, still talk about depression, still talk about anxiety. So as we talk about a mental health condition can only account for 14% variance, we say, well, what's the other 86%? And I want you to look at your folders, because we talk about the 5 types of wealth that really creates a great levity for people to have a solid mental wellness. And you've talked about a lot of those things. And what I want you to do is I want everybody to kind of look at those things and kind of gauge yourself where you're at. So the 5 types of wealth is obviously the financial wealth. Mm-hmm. Then it's the physical wealth, where we're talking about not only being physically fit, but also emotionally fit. And so many times the soma and the psyche, the body and the mind run together. We try to tear them apart. But how your body is actually is how your mind is. How your mind is how your body is. The third is a spiritual wealth, and you had talked about that. The fourth is a social wealth. You talked about these relationships. But then the fifth is what we call time or freedom. And what I worry about mostly with you, with a lot of our helpers, is this. We become almost a slave to a clock, because you say, I got to do it all. It's a puzzle that needs to be fit, and we try to fit every piece and not just our piece. We try to be the whole puzzle, which is almost impossible to do. So what I want you to do is, and everybody, as you kind of look at these, I want you to ask yourself those questions. Do you know what your blood pressure is on a regular basis? As we talk, you don't have to give me your
I was
numbers.
gonna say, yeah, I do.
Okay, hey, that's even better. Where you at?
I'm at a 122 over 79 right now.
Okay, so when we talk about that systolic over dystolic, that is absolutely essential. There's so many people who don't know that.
Yeah.
One of the things I was upset with the COVID testing, they would ask me what my race was, even though we know race is not a biological construct, it's a social construct, but they never asked me what my blood type was. Because I would think that especially O-negative people be like, a little air on their chest.
Yeah,
they can give to everybody, but nobody can give to them except for O-negative. So I was wondering, like, why wasn't this here? But why I say that point is this: how many of us are really aware of ourselves? Because with mental health, it really comes with the self-knowledge. And I love what you said. Why you were so powerful in this is because you were vulnerable, but you said, I understand my strengths, I understand my challenges, I understand the opportunities out there, and I understand the threats. And when we recognize all of those things together, we can make good decisions. So what I want everybody to look at on your sheet is this: when we ask ourselves these things, on those 5 types of wealth that create that health, how well do you know yourself? And even if you know yourself, how are you doing as it relates to putting yourself in the best place? Because if the helpers go down, what happens to the people who we help? So this is the question for you. You talked about the relationships with your daughter, how it feels to see them when you come in. What about those nights where you have to be out at 3:30? Those nights you can't say prayers and you can't tuck them in. How do you make sure you're keeping those things in balance?
Well, I think that's about having a good team, because my team understands that I have young girls, and it's really about having that balance. And so if I'm going to be out, and there are days where, I'm out and I may not come home, but I'm also making sure that I'm taking one of them to school every morning, and I'm getting them together, and I'm the one doing breakfast and all of that, because this is what they're going to remember, right? And for me, it's about every moment and every memory that I create for them moving forward. I want to be there for them all the time, and I know that I can't. But when you talk about being an elected official or being an entrepreneur or being someone who wants to make change, it takes a toll. It takes a lot of time. But when you have a partner and you have kids that you can have conversations with and they love what you're doing, that makes it even more easier. Because it's hard to do this work by yourself, And I would say that no matter who you are, you're not doing anything by yourself. You got some type of support behind you that is assisting you on making the progression that you're looking for. And so, it's a balance. You have to create that balance, And I would say that I got an opportunity to understand what that meant being a staffer first, because so many people got lost in position, and lose themselves in the position. And I always go back to one thing that, a former colleague of mine, Representative Jason Fields, said to me when I first became a state rep. He said, don't get lost in this seat, because he was telling me about what he had went through his first time being elected and his struggles, right? And he said, you can get lost in the power of this seat, but don't forget that you make this seat. The seat don't make you. And I've always kept it in the back of my mind, because I need to make sure that, because I'm county executive and, people say, oh, you got all this power. It's not, it hasn't come to my head isn't that big yet. Yeah. It's not that big, well, my daughters will say something different, but my head isn't big. So for me, it's staying grounded, it's staying humble and understanding what I'm actually here to do.
So I want to go through all 5 of these wealths for the people so we can go through, and I want you to talk about at your roughest times, how you were able to still maintain. So when we talk about that first wealth, because obviously if you have financial options, different things are options for you. When things were roughest for you financially, what kept you from saying, I'm gonna go into the streets, I'm gonna make these dollars, but I'm gonna make them illegally by any means necessary, because of my circumstances, I can justify that? Because it's somebody who's listening saying, yeah, I hear you, and I'm proud of you. But that ain't my situation, that ain't my reality. Yeah. What hope do you have for them who's feeling the fire to their feet right now?
So when and I've definitely had financial periods where it was like I'm broke and not sure how I was gonna pay rent, because, I moved out about a month before I actually finished high school. Yeah. And so when I had moved out, I wasn't even working, and, it was just a struggle. But the one thing that I thought about particularly was another family member's experience when they went to the streets, you know, and did 18 months in prison and came back out and couldn't find a job. You know, when I think about my friends who were at that time who were either dead or in jail, I knew I didn't want to go to prison. That was the one thing that I knew that I did not want to do because of what I've been told. And so for me, one, I had to step outside my comfort zone. Dad, I need some money, you know, and my dad was a master electrician, and if he was doing side jobs, then I went to go do a side job with him. Or I went to go cut some grass, or I went to go find a job somewhere. I had to go. It's easy to get caught up in the streets. Yeah. That's the easy route, right? And so, but the easy route is also destructive for me and my future. Yeah. So it was not even an option for me because of everything that I had seen.
Oftentimes, we see people, they'll go to the doctor begrudgingly. I don't want to go to the dentist, but I'll go. But when it comes to mental health, and we talk about this physical wealth now, people don't want to see that. How can we normalize that inside of our school systems? Because when you go inside the school systems, a lot of the principals, a lot of the administrators, a lot of the teachers, a lot of the workers say, we're not equipped to deal with this. These children have issues that go far beyond what we're dealing with. And so how do we create that physical, from an emotional standpoint, wealth inside our schools, inside our communities?
You know, I was just learning about these sensory rooms. Yeah. And I think that we need more of those in our school systems, actually. Sometimes you just need a space for somebody to go and just calm down and just chill sometimes. Because you have so much happening around you. You got the young people, you got your teachers, you know, you may be hearing music, there's education going on, yet I have not had the time to decompress and just say, yo, I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. You know, we're not providing that space sometimes. And sometimes that space is just, you know what, let me just take you here, put you in a room, just dim the lights a little bit, put on some soothing music, and just say, how are you feeling today? And we forget how far that goes. You know, it's because when we ask you how you doing, it's oh, I'm doing all right. It's so, you know, it's so superficial now.
It's visceral responsibility.
You know, it's just like, I'm good. It's just, it's a passing by conversation now. We're not taking time to actually sit down and ask our young people sometimes, okay, let's just talk. And I think sometimes, again, going back to our earlier discussion, when we say we're not equipped, it's because we want to be able to find a solution. And sometimes the solution could be, let me hear you out. Yeah. Let me just talk to you. Yeah. Because when you think about young people in general, especially growing up for me, I was told that young people was to be seen and not heard. Yeah. And a lot of young people are not being heard right now. They just need that opportunity. Yeah.
Based on what you just said, we're going to take a pause real quick because I think you've just given people a solution they don't even know that you've given them for a brief moment. How many times have we gone through the day and you just be like, I just need a second? So what I want everybody to do, I know this live TV, this will sit with, but I want you to close your eyes, you too, Brother David. And I want you to think about a person who is still living on this earth that you can touch. I want you to think about how you love them, about how they've poured into you. I want you to think about one of those defining moments that just stays etched in your memory. I want you to just live in that space for the next 20 seconds. I want you to slowly open your eyes and come back to. Just by show of hands, how many people feel just a little bit better right now? So now what your challenge is to do is that person who you thought about is to make sure when you get out this meeting is to go and tell them that some man you didn't know told them to think about somebody that they love and they were the person who came up. And I think that goes into your point of what we talk about relationships, where we talk about bringing love back into the schools. Just a 30-second kind of demonstration could help us reset those sensory rooms. I think sometimes we think the answer has to be complicated. but sometimes it can be simple. Now, we don't want to oversimplify things because there's certain needs that we have, but I think if we look within our hearts and we can find that humanity in all, that's how you can move to the office of equity and everybody can still be okay with it. So that kind of moves us to the social wealth. And those are those things with this. Now think about the person who you just thought about, but then ask yourself, how much time do I spend with them? How much time do they really know I love it? Having that relationship with your daughters is there. You said having a team to make sure they know I need this amount of time. Because there are certain things that families understand, but you said I don't want them to have to understand too much. How do you talk to people about saying, because you said you have a great team, what are some of the things that your team knows that you must do? You said, I'm driving them to school every day. I'm going to spend this much time with them. What are some of the other things that you made known to your team? These are my non-negotiables as it relates to my family.
Well, I mean, that was it. that is it. Like, my non-negotiables is my girls. Like, Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays, that's my days I'm taking them to school or taking them to daycare. Like, that isn't a non-negotiable because, in elementary school, I don't remember my parents taking me to school. That's and I just don't remember that. My school was right across the street, and I walked across the street. My girls go to German Immersion, and we stay around the corner from German Immersion. Well, one of my girls goes there, and to be able to take her to school, right? And she's and not only seeing, and she's proud because she's seeing all these other parents with her schoolmates, and she's like, well. And she's more excited for me to take her to school versus my wife right now. I don't know why, but I definitely got daddy's girls. But those are my non-negotiables as related to my girls. And so, whether it's making sure that I have weekends open enough to be able to take them out somewhere, or just being able to take them to school, that is really my only non-negotiable right now. Because I also like to work. Like, I like to be in this community. I'm a community organizer at heart who is now elected to do the work that I was doing before I even thought that I would be elected. So, my non-negotiables is really about my time with my daughters, but that's it.
And I love that you say that because so many times when people get into a position, they say, but I got to do this, and then they sacrifice the things that mean the most. And what hurts my heart is just recently, we talk about the murders. But suicide is always triple the time of murders. We've had a beauty queen who seemingly had it all. We've had the son of an actress. And then we had a mayor, 44 years old, 2 children, killed himself. And the whole question is, if we keep going and we keep going till we can't help anybody, all of that work we was doing was for naught anyway. So I want to applaud you and just let everybody here kind of rest in those moments when we think that the world can't live without us, that it really can. And those people who really need us the most sometimes suffer the most for what we do. How do we keep that balance? What I want you to think about is this. We talk about these different types of wealth, and we talk about a spiritual wealth. And so obviously a lot of people come from a lot of different religions, so you don't say you have to do this. But when we talk about spiritual wealth, what we talk about is a right from wrong. What are your ethics? What are your morals? What are your values? So whether it comes from the Bible or from the Quran or from the Torah or from the Tao Te Ching, whatever your source may be, or even just a code of ethics for humanity. How do we instill that? Because it's famously been said, we can legislate a law, but we cannot legislate morality. How do we bring that sense of spiritual wealth, of wellness, of wholeness back into our community when there is so many obstacles that prevent us from being ethical, moral, and just humane to one another?
Well, one, I think when we talk about spirituality, depending on who you talk to, is synonymous with religion. But spirituality is much different than religion. Religion is a practice of spirituality, right? And so for me, when I think about spirituality, I think about there's something out there that connects me to every one of you all, and those beyond this, and those who are watching right now. Spirituality for me keeps me grounded in understanding that the work that I'm doing is not for me. It is for the greater good of the people. But it really takes understanding your past. When you think about, for me, when it comes down to spirituality is understanding, okay, I'm a student of politics. What has happened before me? with people in these different positions. And if we're going to make a change, okay, why was it there in the first place? And so the spirituality for me is always being connected to the reasons of why we are of what we are, right? As far as the legislative piece, because I can't answer the major question of why we are here. But spirituality, you know, for me, it's a conversation that we have to continue to have as people. And it's not getting in the conversation of religion, but spirituality is saying that there is something, there's a common thread that connects us all, you know, just in general. You know, I look at it as, you know, like spirituality. If I see somebody, you know, a foot get ran over by a car, I feel like I feel it. Mm-hmm. You know, that's that spiritual connection. You may not be there physically, but you feel like you got that connection. But I think that's something that we have to find our spiritual connection with one another, particularly in more intimate settings. When you talk about who's in your household or who is influencing the most, because that's what's keeping you accountable to somebody. It's keeping you responsible to somebody. And I think spirituality helps to set a level of expectation for yourself when it comes down to what is right and wrong, and when it comes down to your values. But you have to be able to identify your values, and when you understand the shared values amongst whoever you're working with or communicating with or have that relationship with, I think it helps propel whatever you're doing. You know, whatever you are thinking. So spirituality for me it's needed. It is definitely needed because, man, if I can't lean on God, you know, I'm not, you know, if I can't lean on the one I believe that created me and created everything around me, I can't lean on anybody because I don't have that connection to anyone.
So how do we infuse that humanity into those who have not shown that level of humanity towards their brother and sister? And I'll give you an example. Within our county, specifically our city, there's a rash of stolen cars. And everybody wants that stopped. I don't think there's nobody who wants that to go on. The question becomes then, how do we handle that situation? Is it more police? Is it to lock them up? And the solution, does it really help the problem or does it make it worse? So how do we reimagine the corrective and discipline for those who go astray of our county rules? How do we discipline them, but yet still show them love so that they can rehabilitate and re-enter as better people, the best of themselves? I
mean, that's a question that I think we're constantly trying to answer. You know, whether we talk about our young people or anyone entering the criminal justice system in general. The problem is that the system has been set up to just keep people locked up. It wasn't set up to rehabilitate anyone. But that's what we have to change. That's what we have to pivot and turn this actually into a health and human service aspect of life. Because if we want people to be rehabilitated, we have to give them the tools. You know, and let's be very clear. You know, if somebody's in the House of Corrections and we're giving them the tools right then and there, we have to figure out how do we help them once they're outside these four walls to make sure that they're on the best path. Because we can't sit there and say, all right, you've been here, we did what you did, you're rehabilitated, we see you're doing well, but we're gonna stick you back into the same environment that you came in, you know, and with the same people who are your major influencers, right? And like, I want to be able to develop those people into leaders who, when they go back, if they have to go back into those same neighborhoods and that same environment, they're getting some of those other individuals to think a little bit differently. Yeah. That's what we really need to be focusing on, is how does the programming and the services that we're providing, you know, for those adjudicated youth or for those individuals who have been convicted of a crime, how are we providing them the tools to become leaders themselves and being a part of the change that we need to see?
Yeah. I like that. So when we go to the last kind of wealth, and these wealth again help us to have a strong mental health, a strong mental wellness, it's time and freedom. When we look at time, we look at, you know, chronological time. I have to be here at 4. You got a meeting at 5. The schedule is tight where you need a good team to make sure you're there. But in the Greek concept, there's another term called kairos, which means there's a window, a moment. You think about Aaron Rodgers and a quarterback. He has a small window to get this ball through before it's intercepted or it's not. You as the county executive, you have this window to be in this seat. Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, maybe you move on. But for this window that you have, what do you hope to do? How do you plan to maximize this moment for everything that you have? So when you leave, they know, guess what? When the county executive, David Crowley, was here, he did A, B, C, and D. How do you want your legacy to be thought of?
You know, I've never thought about that because I just want to create change. And so when I think about my legacy is going to live through my girls.
Yeah.
You know, but when you think about what I want to leave Milwaukee County with and what I want Milwaukee County to be known for is the fact that they were willing to step outside its comfort zone and move the needle, right? And it is not the same old. You know, I mean, one, you know, since I've been in this seat, the relationship between the county board and the exec's office has changed, right? I want people to say, well, this is how government should work. You know, this is how government should be partnering with community organizations. This is how government has found a way to necessarily, and I want, you know, some people say get out the way, but allow people to actually step up. You know, I want to be known for this in this community for being the guy who challenged the system, not just for the sake of challenging it, but bringing some real solutions to the table. But that's a really good question. I never really thought
There's
about
things to think about. And as you say questions, they're giving us the signal. It's time to bring in the questions. So a lot of people have been listening. I'm sure you've heard some things that you've already heard, maybe been introduced to some things. But what are some questions, and I want somebody to be smart enough, brave enough to lead with the county executive, that he said that as it talks about this mental wealth, this mental health, this mental wellness, that he said that's impressed upon you. You know what? I love what he said here, and this is how it touched me, because with mental health, once one person says one thing, it becomes that puzzle piece. So what's the piece you have to add to him, to add to our puzzle? There we go.
Acho, and he better watch out. You're an amazing moderator.
Man.
County Executive Quality. The question I have for you is how can collaborations between the city, the state, and the county come together to really reinvest in our public school system? I see opportunities where, as a proud graduate of Bradley Tech High School, there was TT survey classes. We got a chance to learn, you know, shop and robotics and welding and carpentry. And when I think about the young people, and I understand that if my freshman year I was able to understand how an engine works, by my senior year I would have built a car that's better than any car I could have taken. How can we look at some of the opportunities we have through funding, going after, you know, federal grants, to bring together about the change so that rather than focusing on discipline, we have positive behavior incentive solutions?
So it's a really great question, and thank you for that question. So when we talk about the partnership, I would say that is one of the things that we've been really focusing on right now, right? So when you think about city, county, and the state, how we, particularly with this pandemic, throughout all the challenges, created the opportunity where it forced us to have to work together, right? So when you think about the CARES dollars and the ARPA dollars, I want to maximize all these dollars. We need to be leveraging the 183 million that we got at the county, and the 400 million that they got at the city, and the 2 billion that they got at the state. So if I'm going to be focusing on a project, there's no reason why I shouldn't be calling on the city or even MPS or either the school district to figure out how we leverage these dollars. But the thing is, again, we have to get intentional. One, when it comes down to Milwaukee County, I would say that we have to rebuild the political power that we once had within the state of Wisconsin. You know, when you think about the 80s, the 90s, we had a greater voice than what we have right now, being the economic engine of the state and how we support all the different municipalities. But I would say that we also need to step outside our comfort zone as far as Milwaukee, right? Everywhere across this state, everybody beats up on Milwaukee. But half the people who beat up on Milwaukee has never been here or met anybody from Milwaukee. So, you know, what are we doing to actually build a bridge to be able to have some real conversations about the needs of Milwaukee, right? So when we talk about, for example, the sales tax, which will allow basically local municipalities to have, you know, greater control of the dollars that we bring in. Well, that's not going to work in Neenah. That's not going to work in Kenosha. That's not going to work in River Falls, right? But how do I help them understand that, one, we're all in the same boat when it comes down to the lack of funding for municipalities, but I want you to understand that we're fighting with you when it comes down to making sure that you can get the resources you need, but I need you to understand why we need something different. And so we got to build those relationships. Because even when I was in the assembly, I mean, I'm one of 99, you know, and in Milwaukee, we may have 12 or 13 people who represent the Milwaukee area out of that 99. That's not a majority for us. So how are we building those relationships to actually get things done for this community is going to be key.
Another question. Thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen. Great job, Dr. Smith and County Executive. Wonderful job also. And thank you for the WCS shout out. I really appreciate that. That this
only
staff
said it
will
'cause
love you
it's
for
true.
that. Yes, absolutely. So my question is, look out over the next 5 years. You said a lot of really interesting things this morning. What needs to happen, in your opinion? What 3 things need to happen over the next 5 years to put the county on a solid course toward racial equity, economic equity, and also wellness, both physical and mental wellness?
Oh, great question. So I'm always go back to the funding piece when you think about the sales tax, because we haven't been able to make investments as a community. You know, whether you're talking about any government across the state of Wisconsin has not been able to make the investments because we're not getting the resources back locally. So we can actually invest. Right now, this is it's been more of a strategy of divestments. Where do we cut from? And we've cut to the bone to the point to where we have nowhere to cut from, right? Unless we're literally willing to cut off a major, if we go cut off our leg, then what? So I would say the funding is going to be key. 2, as we continue to approach, particularly, I think that when we look at our criminal justice system, everybody wants to tinker with the police or tinker with the court system or tinker with the House of Corrections. This is a system. And so you can't do anything on the front end or the back end of the system without something happening in between. And so the question is how do we start to focus on the system itself to actually make change as we move forward? So I would say system-wide change is something that we're looking at, particularly throughout Milwaukee County. But I would also say that I would say the other thing that we have to use is our influence. And so, you know, outside of the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, we were the first to talk about racism being a public health crisis. But now you're seeing how Shorewood is getting on board with a lot of work, how West Dallas is getting on board, and Brown Deer. And so how do we utilize our influence in not only the municipalities within Milwaukee County, but surrounding the county and across this state, particularly when you see that it's, you know, you got more black and brown people growing across this state. You know, people are going to be looking to us and say, okay, how do we tackle these issues? And so for us, it's how do we utilize that influence to get what we need to be a better place, but how do we use our influence to actually move other municipalities, businesses, the private sector into a place to where this is something that they have to work on too.
Can I query upon what he said, because I think it's so powerful. I hear you, and I love, because I hear your youth, I hear your encouragement, I hear your hope. But I think about a state that's gerrymandered the way ours is, and people who hear you and say, we're not even going to talk to them, we're not even going to entertain it. How do you then reach out to those other people to create that equity when they don't want to reach back out to you?
Well, I would say it's something that I did when I was a state rep. And the first thing that I did was I went out and tried to meet with every Republican I could. And the reason why I did that is because I have a perception. And the problem is that my perception is not reality. Yeah. But that is the key. Everybody's perception is their reality. So I stepped outside my comfort zone and built some real relationships. And you know, even when I was in the assembly, we had strange bedfellows when it came down to different legislation. You know, but that's the issue. I would say that, you know, when you think about the people who are elected, you know, as colleagues, you can build those relationships, right? And it's not to say that you're not going to, you know, and my running joke in the assembly was I can change minds, but it doesn't mean I'm gonna change a vote. But the thing is, if you want to change a vote, you got to get connected to the people who are voting for that person. And so for me, it's okay. Yeah, I can connect with this Republican colleague or this Democratic colleague, but who influences them? This is where the organizer comes out of me, right? Like, who influences them? Who are the people connected to them that can help change their mind, that can encourage them to think something differently as far as what's going on, within my community. And I think that's the key piece, because a lot of the times, if I need Doc you to do something, and you're like, no, I ain't doing it. All right, let me call his wife.
Don't do that.
All right. Oh, his wife ain't gonna go. Let me see if I can get the pastor. Okay, But I'm gonna continue to find people, your influencers, to help encourage you on why things need to happen. Because the thing is that you have to find trusted messengers. No matter partisan politics, no matter where you are in this community or industry, you need trusted messengers to bring things to the forefront. And I've spent my career not only fighting for equity and fighting for this community, but developing the reputation of a trusted messenger.
I'd like our next question to come from the Behavioral Health Department, and a question specifically that's dealt with wellness, and something that the county executive has said, where we say, we've started in this, and this is how we're even growing this even more. No pressure.
Well, no pressure. County Executive Crowley, you've talked a lot about the wellness and what can we do collectively to make sure that our staff that have really not taken a break throughout the entire pandemic, who've been out there, our mobile crisis teams, our CART teams, our hospital staff, all of our partners, and many of them are here today, have been through and through doing this work. How do we make sure that they keep that balance and keep that wellness, and how can we directly help them achieve that wellness with their staff to keep people in the game and keep people on the course that we're trying to chart here?
Great question. I got to be careful what I say now. Well, first and foremost, I would say we got to get people in the doors and get them jobs. That's the first and foremost. When you think about the middle of this pandemic, particularly when you think about BHD, or when you think about just public health in general, people who are deemed as essential workers and had to work the past 2 years, people quitting those same jobs. First and foremost, thank you for all your hard work, for your dedication, for your passion for this work, because I know it's not easy when you see the people literally dropping like flies from your organization. I know it's not easy. So one, you will always, it's one of the reasons why, I'm talking about rehiring change makers. I think that's the first and foremost thing that we can do. But it's also providing space. It's providing that space, right? So whether we're talking about through HR, some companies have through HR where they can call that hotline and be able to talk to an individual, one, getting those resources out. But I think a lot of the times it's based off of our personal relationships. It's like, we are all going through it, especially if you're in that industry. If you're within that industry, you're all going through it. It's okay. What can we do to assist one another? Because sometimes the best person that can help you out is the one going through the exact same thing you're going through. And so just really having those open and honest conversations, being vulnerable without feeling like your coworker's going to go out there and talk about you and breach your trust, talking about what you've been talking about. But I think at the end of the day, we have to give them the resources that they need to get the help that they want.
And I think when we talk about that, again, that help to helpers, how do we give relief financially to be able to overcome some of those new financial burdens, but then the emotional stress to have that time off when it's a constant need for them? How do we solve those in real time?
I don't know. When you talk about solving for this in real time, I would say that we tried to do that when you talk about like pandemic relief dollars and, trying to give, pay bumps to individuals who are doing this work. But at the end of the day, when you think about the inflation now happening and what we're seeing in this community and how we're opening back up, people are still struggling. And at the end of the day, this is about how we bring resources into Milwaukee County to spread those resources to not only the individuals that we employ directly or contract with, but also the people that we serve on an everyday basis. And so when it comes down to how do we really tackle this, I believe there's 3 different types of power, right, in my opinion. Some people would say, well, 2 of them is the same, but voting power, right, but that's not necessarily with this situation. But people power, right? People power is when we're in a room together and being able to have a conversation like this. People power can go a long way, and it should go a long way. And then the last power is money power. And the money power, that's the issue for Milwaukee County and many local municipalities and organizations that are on the ground, because they're not getting the resources to actually do the work that they're doing. And so until we start funding services and programs at an adequate level, it's going to be very hard for us to build up the people power needed necessarily to come after and tackle many of the issues that we have. Now, I will say that the people that we have are doing a phenomenal job. You know, when you talk about some of the shoestring budgets that they're working on, or the reduced staff that they're working with, they're doing phenomenal. But we still need to give them resources so they can have a break. I'm gonna throw his business out there. When we hired our comms person, within like the first 4 months of working, he was working. He didn't get his first break until like a month ago. And it was almost as if, we asked him, well, why haven't you taken a break? Well, he was used to working jobs where he never got a break, So, we also have to realize that, some people are conditioned and it's the trauma, and some people are working to get away from home and to get away from everything, but we have to have those vulnerable conversations in order to really move forward.
What I want to do is I want to make sure, because when we talk about mental wellness, sometimes if we get focused on the negative, that pulls us down again. I want someone to not only come with a question, but also a time that you had a success story on something, some new initiative that came out, something creative and inventive that happened where you say, listen, there is hope. We seem like we're in a hopeless situation, but there is hope, and this is an actual situation that we can identify.
Just last week, my organization, the Mirror Response Team, received a call from a therapist, and that therapist had a loved one who was living with some challenges. When we got there, one of the things that we noticed was there was family. There was about 5 or 6 family members who were invested in positive outcomes, and the atmosphere started to change. When we talk about helping the helpers, this therapist is on the front lines, but when you're at home, that professionalism, it's not always welcomed. People don't want to be managed. They don't want to be handled. And so there was a moment where we just kind of reassessed the room and found out who were some of the people, who was Auntie sitting over there and Cousin June right there, and we built relationship. And it turned into like a support group where one aunt started talking about their 23-year-old child, and another aunt started talking about their 23-year-old child. Now we are building community. And one of the suggestions that was made was, after we solve this challenge, let's move on to your loved one. And then can we meet again next week? Can we sit down and have this conversation? Traditionally in our business, we sit down and do crisis management plans ahead of time. We're focused on prevention. This was one of those opportunities where this wasn't even a client of ours. This was someone who does the work. And so when we think about these success stories, MPD came out, District 6, equipped, crisis intervention trained officers showed up to the scene, and we were able to have a conversation. Hey man, could you park down a few houses? We don't want to cause any triggers. We had those conversations outside, and we decided, you know what? Let's revisit this in 72 hours. Let our team take it from here. We're going to come back to you, and I can actually say today, 72 hours later, we have a succession plan. The young lady who is 62 years old now is actually where she wants to be. And her family is saying, you know what? Chapter 51 didn't even have to happen. And I want to give a shout out to MPD because they were compassionate. The first thing that they said is, we're not just going to come in here arresting people. We're not just going to do this. If this person is not showing an imminent danger, we don't want to take them out of their homes. And so when you put the people and the resources together, it might be untraditional. It might be something that people say, oh, we can't do it that way, or it's never been done before, but the Wright brothers got us to fly a plane. And so now when we think about innovation, we think about technology, we think about getting ahead of the crisis, I think it was a saying that said, an ounce of prevention, can really, what is that?
It's better than a pound of cure.
Better than a pound of cure. Thank you.
And see, when we talk about this, is what I want us to recognize is so oftentimes we focus on the hardships, the negatives, and they're there. But if we don't have a time to reward ourselves, pat ourselves on the back for what we are doing, we go down a lot quicker. I don't think we ever want to be in a state of imagination, a state that's delusional. We recognize that there are hardships. But from a CDC model, they always try to tackle things in 3 ways. From a primary prevention, from a secondary, what's this crisis that's kind of imminent or going on, and a tertiary, okay, it's happened, what can we learn from it? I want to kind of wrap us up kind of with that part right there. What are your 3 major kind of objectives where you say, okay, this is something that's negative that's happened, but we learned from it. This is how we're going to grow. This is something that we're dealing with, And you know what? It's tough, but this is what we're doing. We're making progress. But then the last one is, what are we doing, you say upstream, to be able to prevent some of these things, to be able to promote positivity so we don't even have to deal with the illness, but just focus on wellness.
So, I mean, this is, for example, answering the latter first. I mean, this is part of that discussion, right? Having these community series focus on really on health and healing, right? Folks don't know what's out there. People don't know how to have the conversation. And people may be watching today and be like, wow, that was a real deep conversation. But it may help lift that burden and and light that fire in somebody's belly to say, you know what? We got to start having some really crucial conversations.
Yeah.
And so I would say this is something that we're doing right now to really jumpstart that. When you think about, you know, what else we're doing, our mental health emergency center. You know, we realized that we had to do something differently. You know, so we have BHD out there of Watertown Plank Road. Now we're going to have the Mental Health Emergency Center opening up, I believe, September of 2022, to really focus on those emergency crises. And the key about that, you know, what we learned was, well, people are coming all the way out here to Wauwatosa. The majority of the people that we're serving actually live in or around the 12th and Valete area. And so that's why we put the mental health emergency center over there, because 70% of the individuals that we're serving live in this particular area or surrounding this area. So let's give them greater access to services. That's something that we quickly learned, and we figured out, okay, this is what we have to pivot to do. But I would say that we're constantly learning. We're constantly learning. And, you know, I'm a guy who believes in both failures and success. You know, I tell young people all the time, you know, as we talked about it, you know, try means to fail with honor. Don't try, do. You know, there's nothing wrong with failure, except for when you don't learn from it. You know, so if you want to be successful, in some cases you may have to double your failure rate, learn from it, tweak it so you can be the most successful you want to be. And so that's the key. That's what we're constantly doing within all of the different departments within Milwaukee County. But I would also say that we're also learning that we are one county. We are one county. DHHS shouldn't just be doing it on its own. How do you partner with the parks? How do you partner with the Office of Equity? How does OEM, the Office of Emergency Management, fit within all of this? Because all of our departments touch one another and have different skill sets. So there's no reason why they're all working in different silos. So for us, you know, there's no longer a wrong door. If you're coming into Milwaukee County and you need services, we want to make sure that you're getting all the services that you absolutely need, and you don't have to make 3-4 phone calls just to say, okay, I need housing. All right, you talk to the housing division. Okay, let me call veterans. Okay, now you talk to veterans. Oh, you also over a certain age. Okay, now you're going to call aging. No, we need to eliminate that to allow people to have a seamless process in getting the services and the programming that they need.
So as you start to think about, this is my county now, because you said you don't want to
This
say that,
is our county.
But you're the general. So we're going to put that on you because you've been elected to do that. Sometimes to be the general, you can't be as nice. You have to say, this is what we need. What is the challenge? And I'll keep coming back to this because the word you use that I think is so fabulous is relationships. What is the hard challenge that you have to the community? The people who want to challenge you to say, hey, you know what, all politicians are bought out. You know what, all politicians are just getting their own pockets fat. All politicians are this and saying all of those things. What challenge do you have to not just the workers, but to the people who are listening, the people who are part of this county that complain about it, but maybe don't do as much to really make it grow?
So
now you got to be a tough boss.
Yeah. So I start to think about, you know, Mrs. Patterson when I was in sixth through 8th grade at Milwaukee Educational Center, and she used to always on the PA every morning say, if you're not a part of the solution, then you're a part of the problem. And we need people to understand that. As soon as you turn a blind eye, you are part of the problem. And so I'm gonna challenge everybody out there. What are you doing to be a part of the solution on an everyday basis? And not necessarily, you know, we ain't got to talk about in the community. Let's just talk about within yourself and within your household. How are you a part of the solution? Because a lot of the times, you know, some people are willing to go help put out somebody else's fire, and they kitchen on fire right now. You know, so you know, let's one, how are you focusing on yourself, the solutions within your household, and then branching off, going out and being a part of the solution in this community? Because no one can turn a blind eye anymore. Everybody needs to be involved. This is a community. you know, and if we're going to be a community, it's going to take all of us really coming to the table. So my challenge is for people to ask themselves, what am I doing to be a part of the solution? And if I'm not, am I a part of the problem?
We have a query for you.
I have a question. So how do we promote those community leaders and the access to allow them to know what services are available in the community? Because I'm from 53206, and I believe strongly in that community and the leaders that are in that community right now. There are a lot of people in that community that have a lot of resources and information that can help. But how do we promote that and get the word out that there are services available, and we do need the leaders to stand up in these communities and be a part of all of this?
Well, you know, as an organizer, I'm always a fan of door to door. You have to bring the resources to where the people are. And I think that, particularly in the past 2 years, we haven't had that opportunity to really do that. And I think that's why we're seeing so much happening, because we haven't brought the resources to folks. You don't know what you don't know. My dad used to tell me, everything I know he can fit on the smallest corner of a piece of paper. And everything that I don't know, he can fill the ocean with. Which means that there's so much out here that I don't know. But in order to help people understand, I have to bring it to their front door. You know, we're talking about social media now, we're talking TV ads, we're talking mail, we're talking any point in contact that we can have with the community, we need to have. You know, I would say that one thing that I used to be a NSP organizer through the city of Milwaukee. A lot of people don't know that there's 18 different NSP areas, and they each have a community organizer. And all of them go door to door. How do we get that information to those people who are going to door almost on a weekly basis to give information out to the community? Those are the things that we need to be doing. Or when you think about the fact that when we talk about like credible messengers, you know, those are individuals talking to young people and families. It's not about just being that mentor. How are you wrapping the services around them by giving them the resources? But a lot of the times, some of us know what resources people need, but we don't say anything because we don't want to overstep our boundaries, which I can also understand. But that's when that vulnerability and stepping out your comfort zone comes in. Because sometimes you may say, you know what, I see what you're going through. You know what, here's a number that you should probably call. And I've done that with people. And I'll be honest with you, you may give that person the resource. It may take them a week or a month to call that individual. But I also feel like it's my responsibility to at least check in at least once a week and at least ask. And I'm not going to badger you to say, hey, did you call? Just, hey, did you make the call? Did you at least, you know? And if you didn't, I may ask why. But by asking, it's a level of accountability. And we have to there's a level of accountability that we have to put on people also, because some people have the resources and don't take advantage of it. And we see that a lot as well.
Two things, and then some other stuff. I'm really not into politics at all. I'm also not into giving attention to talking about the condition of the community, because so much focus that would allow us to have agreement is the work that needs to be done. This has been so therapeutic for me to hear you two brothers talking to one another. Man, thank you for inviting me. Man, thank you for inviting me. I see my beloved brother David Muhammad over there. Thank you for inviting me. In the community, I'm not even from Milwaukee, but I've been here for a while now. My wife is from here. And I have a social service agency. I have a mentoring program. I have an online school. I just recently bought a church in 53206. And I have a lot of work that I need to do to get that building together. And I'm only speaking right now because some of the youth at a school I partner with are looking and holding me accountable. Honestly, they don't even know accountability. They don't even know the relationship they really have with me because they ain't used to being served. So only because of my love for them, I'm speaking up right now because I want to be able to make my word bond to give them and create these opportunities for them to be men. So I hope to share some information with you later.
For sure. I love that. I know we have to kind of start wrapping this up, but to that point, we have people who take this personal you know, and then do things above and beyond. But what I loved, he said, I'm not from here. So I want to know, what are you doing to partner with other county executives outside the state, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel? So many great things going on in our nation and even internationally that we might be able to include, and kind of with that wrap up this whole thing as far as how you reach out to others and what you want us to remember as we kind of close out today.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm working with different county boards across the country as well as county executives. I'm a board member of the National Counties Association, and I've probably been in DC more than I've been in Madison, because that's where all the money is right now, to bring those resources back. But I've also had the opportunity to be a part of a county executives association, like a roundtable, whether we're talking about like the Buffalo County exec or the Houston County exec or the mayor of Miami-Dade, and or I can't remember the place, Boone something in Kentucky. Like we all are coming together and having real conversations about how we move things forward, but also what are some of the things that you're doing and you're learning from what's those best practices. And so, you know, we have been able to utilize some of the work that we have done around COVID-19 to get other communities to start looking at, okay, how do we focus on equity just in general, whether we're talking about the disease burden or getting vaccinations in people's arms. When we talk about what we've done with our Office on Equity, or moving the strategy director out of politics and putting him into the budget office. And people are like, well, why would you do that? You're giving up power. Well, I don't need that power. That's not the power that I should have in the exec's office. The strategy shouldn't be political at all.
Yeah.
You know, so we are having conversations all the time, but even here locally, being a part of, you know, the Wisconsin Counties Association, and having the ability not only to work with their staff, but then getting connected with other staff across this state and other executives. And so, you know, when you think about County Executive Paul Farrell, you know, former Republican state representative, you know, his mother just died, but so he couldn't be at the press conference, but we just did a joint press conference with Waukesha County with the Flex Ride program, getting people for that last mile, you know, to get people to jobs in Menominee Falls and Butler area, right? Like, how do we work together? Because we can't do this work on our own. And when we talk about economic mobility and economic development, Milwaukee has to lead the region, because we're all going to be feeding off of one another in some capacity, particularly when you think about southeastern Wisconsin.
I just want to thank you for everything that you've shared today, for the mission, the charge you've given us all, and for the thing to let everybody know it's okay to not be okay, but that we need to do something to go forward. And I'll close with the words of my maternal grandmother, Daisy Mae Cockerham from Houston, Mississippi, Chickasaw County. She said the best way to heal yourself is to help others, and I think you're doing that.
Thank you.
My man. Thank you. All right. Give me some love, man. Give me some love.